So thank you once more to Mary Kenny for agreeing to present this workshop today. Actually, she didn't agree to present this workshop. She actually volunteered to present this workshop. So we really appreciate Mary Kenny, who's a long-standing Project Exco and a long-standing lead mentor within the Ladder Back Down community. We have known one another for about 3 years now, since the inception of the Ladder Back Down. And Mary has provided her innumerable skills, not only in terms of being a project lead within our Project Exco for an ongoing project, but also she's one of our lead mentors who has actually mentored individuals and a specific individual to actually obtain a job. So we welcome you, Mary Kenny, and I'd like you to do a better introduction than I've done of you yourself. Thank you. Thank you. So please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Tibuku. My name is Mary Kenny. As she has just rightly introduced me, I've been with Ladder Back Down for about 3 years since it started. And prior to that, I also volunteer for other organizations in terms of giving back to the community. I've been in project management for about 12 years, working my way up to a senior consultant currently, function in the space of a PMO person and also function in the space of a PMO lead, delivery lead, as well as a project manager, different roles depending on the organization. And I thought it would be good to create the space where we can share and learn as well. I'm also still learning. I'm not an expert, so this is going to be based on my experience so far on how risk is being managed and what you could do if you find yourself in that situation of how to manage a risk in your organization. And this is linked to project management, because I know there is a risk when it comes to risk management in the organization environment, but this is solely for project or program management risk. I don't know if there's any other information. Yeah, I'm based there in the UK, and that's it about me. Thank you. So the way I've planned this is, because I'm not 100% sure of the audience in terms of experience and in terms of exposure to risk or project on its own. So I thought to give a little background into what project is. So people that experience here, just give us some few minutes to talk about the different types of project or what project is, what portfolio is. That will be the preamble, because I believe those are fundamental things that anyone working in a project environment needs to know. And within the Ladder Back Down, there are a lot of people that are very new into project environment. So I thought it would be good to set that stone and explain what project is, which will help to shape our understanding in what risk management is, which is one of the core controls that needs to be applied when you're planning or delivering a project. So I have put here, what is a project? Every day, we all do projects in one form or another. It could be within your house when you're doing renovation, when you are repainting the house, or even planning a wedding. That could be a project. But for us, in a project environment, the moment you understand that you do projects every day, you can relate that to the project management field. And project management field, it's not, you don't need to necessarily have a certain skill set at the beginning. You can build up on your skill set. And project, as I've written here, is unique because it's not business as usual. It's not something that you do every day. It's something that you want to build upon. And we see in recent times now, like a lot of companies are engaging in projects, either to be able to get more customers, to be able to increase revenue. The popular one that we just had is Threads from Facebook. So that's a project that must have been ongoing in the background for Facebook to be able to get more revenue or to compete with other competitors, which I think Thread is trying to do. So every day we do some sort of project. And one thing that is very unique with project is unique. It's not the same thing. It's something temporal. It has a timeline and it has a start date and an end date. And at the same time, it has a goal or objective of what that particular project needs to achieve. So those are the key characteristics that I've listed here of what a project is. It has a specific time. It has a boundaries or in terms of scope of what needs to be done, and is usually new. And this is applicable everywhere in most of the organizations now, wherever you find yourself. So program, it's just going to be high level. I'm not going into details of what this is. Program is a combination of projects to deliver one or two goals or objectives. So where you have, maybe it's an Apple that needed to build a particular functionality on Apple 11 or iPhone 11 or iPhone 12, the different functionalities or the different Apple products that needs to be delivered within the same organization that could fall in under a program. So a program is a combination of one or two projects delivering one objective or one business goal. We'll move quickly now. You can drop your questions in the chat and we'll review them at the end of the session. And the next thing is a portfolio. So portfolio, if you've been in the industry, is a combination, or if you're new as well, is a combination of projects and programs to deliver a strategic business objectives. The difference between program and portfolio is just because they are delivering a strategic business objectives, and in an organizations or environments where it doesn't necessarily need to be a big environment, a big organization. They would have at the beginning of each year or each financial year a strategic objectives of what they wanted to achieve and how do they achieve it. They would set up different projects or different programs to be able to achieve this, and combination of all of these different projects will make your portfolio. I will skip through now so that we can go quickly to project management and risk management. For anyone interested or you're already in joining a project, you need to have the fundamental, which is understand what project management is, which is, the word is management, how we manage projects, the application of different processes, different methods, different skill sets and tools to be able to make sure that that objective of the project is being delivered. And that's what, those are the things that you need to learn and understand even before jumping into understand what project management is. This is for newbies, people that are just joining or people that are just coming into the environment or into the industry, I mean. So I will jump straight to my next slide. So I've put this. Yeah, the next thing is the methodologies. Solely this approach that I'm going to be talking about in terms of risk management would tailored slightly towards the waterfall. And on the ladder back, I think within this week, there was a question on what type of methodologies do you need to use when you are delivering a project? And the answer, yes, it depends on the type of project you're delivering. So for people that are new or people that are coming into the industry, you need to master it in a way to understand the different methodologies that are available in delivering projects. But the focus for today's session will be towards more of waterfall projects rather than the agile methodology. So under the agile, the popular one that is being used is the Scrum, where people deliver projects iteratively. although the way risk is being managed is slightly different from the way they are being managed in a traditional environment. And you would notice as well that in the traditional environment, you hear more people being told, oh, there's a project manager, whereas in the Scrum environment or the popular framework within the Agile, you will hear a Scrum Master or a product owner. You hardly hear the word project manager in that environment. So it's one of the things that we need to learn and we need to master to be able to function well and understand what project risk management is. We are almost there. So I've just listed out here the different methodology, and the word waterfall is just sequential. Everything needs to flow in after each other in a waterfall environment, whereas in an agile environment, which is my next slide, things are done iteratively in a way to be able to see the product or the functionality, the minimum viable product, MVP of that particular product that they are delivering. Okay, we are here. So for today, the focus is to understand RAID, and it's going to cut across different experience level. You have people that are very experienced, that understand what RAID is, and people that are not experienced. So I've made it in a way that it covers both skill sets or both experience level. And RAID, you might be seeing it in project advert or in job advert. What does that stand for? RAID is risk, assumptions, or sometimes also depending on the environment, right? Sometimes it might not be assumptions in an organization. It could be an action. Issues is the high, and D could mean dependencies or decisions. So the session today is going to cover what is RAID, how do we assess risks or risk, how do we identify the risk, how do we treat the risk, and what are the governance around it, and the type of different reporting that would provide on risk management. In a nutshell, this is a picture from websites that talks about RAID management or risk management. Most of the time, it would majorly be on risk, because that's one of the key things that every project needs to have before you progress into issue management, before you progress into actions management or decision management. So this picture here is just giving us in a nutshell of what happens in a risk management environment. And the first thing is you need to identify the risk. You need to understand what that risk is by assessing it. And how do you assess the risk? There are a few things that you need to do, which we will cover in this session. And also you need to plan the mitigation of how to ensure that the risk that you've identified and you've assessed can be treated, or your own response, organization response to that particular risk, and continuous monitoring of that risk, review it and update it, or you may have to close the risk. So what is risk? Risk is an uncertain event that, should it happen, it would impact on the program objective. We don't know what it is. It could be it's going to rain, or anything that could happen and impact on the objective that has been set for the project to deliver. Remember, we talked about project. It's not something that is regular. It's something that you have to deliver. It's more like a change that you're bringing into your organization to increase effectiveness, revenue, but it has a timeline to it. So anything that could impact on your objective, whatsoever is the objective of that, your project, either positively or negatively, that is termed as risk. And risk management is a process of identifying it, like I've explained earlier on. Identifying it, assessing it, and making sure that either you then treating the risk in whichever different method that you wanted to treat the risk. An assumption, on the other end, is something that is, you know about it, but there is no proof. So on the project now, we can make assumptions that this project is going to deliver successfully without any risk. It's an assumption. It doesn't have any proof. But at the beginning of any project, before you start your project as a project manager, or even if you work as a PMO or in a project space, it's always good to have a risk log or an assumption log to document all the assumptions that may happen on the project. We'll see along the way that some of the assumptions can turn into a risk if it's not properly managed, or if it becomes valid, like, oh yeah, this was an assumption, but now it's become a reality. So it's a risk. So assumption is a factor that it may be true, accurate, but it doesn't have any proof. We just make the assumptions, and it's good to document it, especially if you're engaging with third parties and you're having contracts that needs to be reviewed. Those assumptions needs to be documented and needs to be tracked in your project as well. And then we have issues. The way the word issues sound itself, normally when it's, oh, does this person have an issue? It's a risk that has already materialized. So risk is a potential something. It has a potential that, oh, this thing might happen, but we don't know if it's going to happen. But when it comes to an issue is, it's no longer a risk. It has happened. And most of the time, even though risk might have mitigations actions or things that we put in place to be able to treat it or respond to it, they do turn to issue. And sometimes it could be oversight within the project team that an issue does not just come up on its own without it being tracked or documented within the risk register. So put here that issue is a materialized risk, is a condition that is having negative effect. Whereas, you know, in the definition of the risk, it has the potential impact on the project. It could be positive impact or negative impact. But an issue is already an impact, which is negative most of the time on the project or on the objective that needs to be delivered by the project. So, and dependency, which is the third aspect of it, is a relationship, logical constraints relationship between two or more activities, where one is reliant on the successful completion of the other. Within the project environment, there are a lot of dependencies that are not being tracked or being monitored. And because they are not being tracked or monitored regularly, this tend to turn into an issue or tend to turn into a risk within the project environment. So if we're able to monitor this within the project environment, regularly tracking them, it will help us to be able to deliver our project successfully. Do we go to the next thing? So which is for any project to be successful, there are controls that need to be in place. So you need to plan your budgets, you need to plan your schedule. But around all of those things that you're planning at the same time, you need to make sure that you have your risk process or management in place, which is a very core component to a successful delivery of your project. And that is having the right controls in place in terms of controls on your budget, controls on your planning as well, which will help you to implement and deliver your project successfully. One of the things that I've noticed over the years while projects are not being, while risk management are not being implemented successfully is because people deem it as the responsibility of the project manager, or there's no clear responsibility of how the project should be done or who is taking ownership of the risk management. So because of that, people tend to not take it serious, or even when there is a risk, it's not documented because there's no process in place. It's not regarded as important element. And that is why a lot of projects fail. And that is one of the reasons why a lot of projects are delayed or they overspend, because the key things that would have been identified as a risk that should have been documented was not done, or they were not done. So I've put it as well, like terms of reference on how risk should be managed is not being communicated. And this could be a way for you, if you're joining a new environment as a project manager or as a PMO or a PSO person or even business analyst, to understand, do we have terms of reference of how we wanted to deliver this project? Or do we have terms of reference of how this risk within this project needs to be managed? And terms of reference could mean so many things across different environments. It could be the frequency of how we want to review the risk. What is our escalation process? What level of risk are we escalating? And the purpose of escalation is not, a lot of project managers run away from this because they feel, oh, it will put them in a bad light. But the purpose of escalation is to get senior management strategy and direction and their support in terms of how to treat or respond to such risk. So all of this needs to be documented in our terms of risk reference on how we want to manage our risk. And there should be a clearly defined roles and responsibility. Within the risk, it's not a one-man responsibility. It's not a project manager responsibility. It is part of project manager responsibility, but it's not the core responsibility to say, okay, you own it, it is yours. It should be everybody within the project. We would find out that along the way, we'll see the different cost area, because risk is across everything that we do in the project, be it the resources, on engagement, business analysis, on requirement, on cost, is across everything. So having all of this key roles and responsibility, and who are the people that are making key decisions, and what are the outcomes of our risk management process, will help to be able to make sure that when we implement a risk management is fully embedded into the project and is successful. Okay, so how do we identify a risk? We might be saying it's, oh yes, yeah, there are different ways of, yeah, we just need to identify the risk, but how do you identify a risk in a project environment? First is we need to look at outside the box. What could be the trigger of this risk? An example I would give is resourcing. We know we are delivering this particular project, but do we have the right skill sets to deliver the project? Have we done our skill matrix to be able to review the risk level that we have? The skill set that we have. And what could be the cost of this? Is it because our resource pool is very low? Or it could even be as a result of budget. Do we have enough budget? Is it because the budget is very low, or we don't have enough funding that has been approved on the project? And what could be the consequences? All of us together would help us to identify and understand that, okay, this is a risk that we need to bring into the project team or to the project board to be able to review and understand and document it and track it. Like I said earlier on, there are different types of risk. We have positive risk, and most of the time in the project environment, we focus more on the negative risk, which is like a threat to the project or to the outcome or objectives that we're planning to achieve on the project. But positive risks are there, and they present themselves in form of opportunities that we need to enhance or exploit so that we can be able to probably deliver the project on time once we understand that this is a positive risk. And at the same time as well, a risk could be internal risk or it could be external risk. Internal risks are risks that are within the project environment, and external risks are sometimes risks that we don't have control over. That could be regulations, compliance that we need to follow or be guided by as a project. And I've also listed here what are the different ways by which or where can we identify risk. You know, I mentioned earlier on that we need to understand the basis, which is the fundamental of what is a project, what are the methodologies, because this will help you to know that risk can be identified across any stage or phase of the project. But most of the time, it's always advisable that there's a risk workshop set out when you are starting a project. This way, you're involving every member of your project team when you have your kickoff meeting. You can have it as a kickoff meeting or later on as the project is starting to bring in all the work streams, all the different areas of the project to understand, okay, in your area, you are the one delivering the testing. Maybe it's the test team or the business analyst, or you could have the solution architect or the cybersecurity team. What do you think would be a risk to us delivering this project successfully? So it's not just limited to the project team only, to project manager. Everybody involved in the project needs to come into the workshop and bring out their own story. I'm foreseeing a risk happening from my area. We don't have the right license. We don't have the right tool. And so having that workshop will help us to be able to identify the risk. And having maybe a bi-weekly session will also help to be able to identify the risk. So in this risk identification that I've put here, it's more on where rather than what. And it could be around the ad hoc project environment as well. So you have your weekly team meetings or even engagement with your customers. A risk could be identified during this process or during this meetings. Also, what are the impacts of risk? This is at a high level. We're not drilling down into saying individual. Risk, once identified or once materialized, it could have an impact on the people or the resources that are working, the benefit of the project. Most of the time, focus is on the timeline and budget, and that's how we assess our risk based on the impact that risk is going to have on the resources, the benefits. What is the objectives? You remember, risk is anything that has the potential of impacting on the objective of the project. So once the risk happen, or should it happen, it would impact on the benefits, on the timeline, the schedule. So a project that has been assigned to deliver for 1 year, You see them because sometimes the risk workshop has not happened or has not been properly done and tracked. That project started taking 2 years, 7 months, 12 months, 15 months. So this, when we are identifying the risk, right, it's also good to ask the question, if you are not maybe a cyber security person or a business analyst person or even a scrum master, to say, have they considered the impact on the timeline? You could bring in that. There's sometimes for you to be a valued member of the project team, you just need to ask a question or you just need to make a suggestion. And this might be your own way of saying, have we considered the impact of this risk? What are the likely impacts that we think it would have on the timeline or on the budget of the project? So this way, once we have all this information, it will help us to be able to identify the risk, to categorize them, to say, okay, if this is a related risk that is internal within the project team, or is something that is external that we don't have control over. And my next slide would talk about the cost category. Yeah. So this are the different areas when we're looking to identify the risk. That is not exhaustive, right? You could have so many other ones. The business, you have the business change team within your project. They need to be raising risk to understand what is the business engagement. You remember, project is a limited time and you're delivering something. It could be that the type of project you're delivering is to benefit the internal customers, which are your core staffs. Maybe it's a rollout of a particular software of how they need to do a project. So the business engagement team needs to start raising it. What is the engagement with the business team? The business. Do we have, project team is different from the business team, remember? Project team are solely focusing on delivering the project, whereas the business team are business as usual. They are the ones that are already doing the operations of that business, of how the business is running. And we as a project team are bringing in value to help them increase efficiency, productivity in whichever way. A risk might occur from a business engagement. Maybe the people are not ready, or maybe a risk could be for business engagement. It could be there are no tools or there are no people to train these people for this project that you're going to roll out. Or it could be related to governance. Maybe there's a new law that's coming now that within the project or within the organization itself that could impact on the timeline or the budget of that particular project that we are working on. Third parties, most of the time, if you work in a large organizations, you are reliant on a lot of third parties to work with you in delivering some of the aspects of the project as a project manager or as a PMO person. So you could have third party issues, licensing issue with the third parties, or it could be customer experience, customer engagement, the products that we're delivering to them. Or it could be that there are dependencies. So you have multiple, the way, when I was talking earlier and I was talking about portfolio or programs, this is where your dependencies come in. And if there is a dependency or in a particular aspect of the project that needs to happen before your project can start or before your project can progress, you need to start highlighting it. Or it could be a resourcing issue. So there was one that I'm aware of where we have a third party that is currently working on the project and they are having a resourcing issue, whereas they also have another project that they are working with as well. But they have now told my project that we will not be able to support you because we are restricted with resourcing, and we need to start flagging that out within the project team as a dependency on that third party, and also as a risk that this could impact our go live date based on the issue or the risk that the third party has already raised for us. So these are the different cost categories that could impact on or could be the basis of how we should be raising our risk within the project team. This is the exciting bit of it. Risk and issue assessment. At the beginning, I talked about identifying the risk, and there are different ways, right? So how do we assess this risk? How do we know that this risk is a valid risk? I've written here, risk assessment is often referred to as risk exposure or the severity of that risk. And the way to calculate it is, what's the likelihood or probability? Some places they call it likelihood, or some call it probability. What is the probability of this risk happening? And should this risk happen, what could be the impact of it? That way you'll be able to understand how exposed or the severity of your risk. I've put a matrix here. But before we go into the matrix, there is what is called inherent risk, residual risk, and target risk in a project environment. Inherent risk is when we identify this risk, we've checked the likelihood of it happening. We have checked, okay, there's a likelihood of it possible. There's a possibility of it happening. So you most of the time would use this likelihood and impact matrix to be able to understand how to assess your risk or how exposed that risk is to you on the project. So it varies. Some environments, they will call it is low, medium, extreme, high. And sometimes they could use 1, 2, 3. Most of the time they will use 1, 2, 3, medium, very simple. But there's some environments where they use it as a bit complicated, where you have extreme. Any risk that is extreme would definitely most of the time be escalated to the senior management for support and review. So as I was, inherent risk is the risk score that you've identified at the beginning of the, when you understand that there's a risk, before you start applying any mitigations or any way of treating or reviewing it. And that is usually fixed throughout the lifestyle of the lifespan of the project or project life cycle. Residual risk, residual risk score is the risk score that has been achieved after you've applied the mitigation actions to the risk. So this will always reduce, because the essence is we've identified this risk. There's a possibility of the risk happening, and this is the impact that this risk is going to have. Maybe we would say it would have an impact is also the same. Well, people treat as consequences, as it's going to be very extreme. But we believe we need to add, by the time we had this different mitigations actions onto it, it should reduce the likelihood or the impact of it happening on the project. And is often highlighted with colors. When you see, and this also is also very helpful when you're doing a report on your risk, like how do you report your risk? Do you want to report the red risk, or do you want to report the amber risk? The target risk is the proposed risk exposure after mitigation action has been applied. So this is, we believe that this is for this risk not to have any impact on our objective for the project, we are setting a target risk. It could be, or the target, the inherent risk when we identify the risk is 20, because it's going to have a very extreme impact on the project. And we are very, very certain that it will happen. but because we've started tracking this risk, we've started applying different mitigations actions into it, we are open before the end of the project that the risk is going to become a very low risk. Maybe we'll give it a score of 4. It's very unlikely, and the impact will be little or nothing. So when you're calculating your risk matrix, this is looking at the possibility of that risk happening and looking at the impact of that risk. Should it occur or should it happen? What is the consequences that it will have on the project? Likelihood and impact matrix. This particular one is very useful to be able to understand how you are going to track and manage your risk. Because if you have a risk, an example, let me give an example of, we're building an hub now, and we have a risk that the developer might call in sick, or the developer might be stuck when he traveled and it won't be available. But what's the likelihood of that happening? And what's the impact of that? Do we have more developers? What are the things that we can do to be able to make sure that even though this happened, how can we deal with it? So understanding the impact of it and the likelihood of it will help you to be able to assess or score or understand the severity of that risk. And this is one of the key things in terms of how we are managing our risk. Because if it's a risk, that it will also help you to understand the type of treatment that you want to apply on the risk. Maybe it's something that we need to accept, which will be our next slide on the different areas or different approach we take in dealing with projects or program risk. So risk treatment. How do we treat risk within the project environment? We have avoidance. What does that mean? Within the project environment, you can decide to avoid the risk when you understand the likelihood of that risk happening against the impact that it will have. The moment you understand that, you can say, oh yeah, the impact or the consequences of this risk outweigh the objective of what we're trying to achieve on this project. So I think we'll rather just stop this project. So they avoid it. That is one way of avoiding a risk on the project. Or it could be that there is an element, a functionality that we wanted to build. And by the time we calculate the likelihood of that risk happening against the impact it will have, we believe that the benefits that we think the project, the functionality will bring onto the project is not as much as the risk impact it will have on the project. So we might as well avoid having that particular functionality on the project, on the project. So that way we'll avoid having to do that task or having to do the project after you have assessed the likelihood and the impact it's going to have on your project. Mitigation, that's like the reduce. So this one, after assessing it as well, you can have a mitigations action in place. I think, if I remember within the week, on one of the questions that was raised during the ladder back down, someone was raising a question of planning a party, and they realized that the weather forecast is saying it's going to rain and it's an outdoor party. What can we do? It's going to rain on its own is a risk that could disrupt the successful delivery of that party. And the likelihood of it happening, we check the weather forecast. What is the impact? It's going to cancel the project. Or planning a party is a project. It's going to cancel it. So what can we do to reduce the likelihood of that happening? Sometimes we might not have control over that, but planning different options having different things planned out. It could be, oh, we would do an indoor session, indoor party. They have different options that was listed on the group that I read then. Or you could tell the people that we're going to reschedule the session. Having different ways of mitigating it. Or bring it back to the project environment where you're meant to engage a third party to deliver a software or a product. And you realize, oh, there's an increase in, we've been hearing it, increase in interest rates. A mitigation actions could be, maybe it's better with other things in the function, the products in prior to when we need it. We know we're still going to need the product so that we can reduce the impact should the interest rates go too much and we are not able to afford to order the product. So having different form of actions in place to be able to mitigate the risk from happening. Sometimes we don't have control, so the risk might still happen, but it lessens the impact of that risk. That's why we have the mitigations actions in place. And that's one way of responding to the risk, by having those things planned out. Another treatment or response is we will accept the risk. This is after you've assessed the likelihood of it happening and the impact. If you see it is something that the project can do with, then we might as well just accept it. That type of risk are usually passive risk that would be tracked within the project risk log and will be monitored whenever there is a risk review session. So sometimes in a different environment, they would call it, they tolerate the risk because the impact is very negligible and the likelihood of it happening is very small as well. That's one. The next one is transfer. We'll transfer the risk. This is very, very common with insurance. A lot of companies, if it's a construction company now, or you're building a project and you realize that there might be, you never know, anything could go wrong on the project, which is why we're having a risk register. Everybody planned that the project will be delivered, but what a pragmatic project manager would always want to think outside the box. What could go wrong? And that's the essence of a risk management within the project environment. So a construction project, one of the ways for them to transfer their risk is they'll get an insurance in case there's a theft, in case there is a fire outbreak. We'll transfer the risk to the insurance company. Or another thing, it could be a booking company. Maybe your business, you're building up a booking site for people where they can book flights or book hotels. You can transfer the risk of flight being canceled or flight being delayed to the insurance company or to the airline itself. So when you have a lot of third parties working on the project, sometimes you transfer the risk to subcontractors rather than having to own the risk on your own. So that way you have less an impact on your project and you're covered as well. The other ways of responding to the risk is you share it. So this way in the contract, when you're creating your statement of work or you're creating your contract, you can share the responsibility or the liability that comes from the risk with the third parties, and it's clearly written out. When you join any new projects and they're identifying risk, you can always say, oh, have we thought of sharing this risk? Have we thought of transfer this risk? What if we accept this risk? What will happen? If we accept this particular risk, what is the impact of it? So that way you're also being able to add some form of value or support on your project team. During the assessment of the risk, as I mentioned earlier, you can escalate the risk. Majorly, if someone mentioned at the beginning, enterprise level risk, They are not the type of project risk. They are not the program level risk. They are enterprise level. An enterprise level could be regional or it could be national. At this level, when you're working in a global company or organizations, they are the type that will have enterprise level risk. And this is beyond the project level, is beyond the program level. And it needs to be dealt with at the top level, maybe at the head office, in the global office. So these are the type of risks that you can escalate to the senior management. But at the same time as well, if you have a risk after assessing the impact and the likelihood, and you check it on your matrix, that is going to have a catastrophic impact or is going to have a major impact, you might start escalating for the senior management to get involved and pull the strings and pull, so that they can intervene and lessen the impact of that particular risk on your project or on the objectives that needs to deliver. I have put enhance on exploit here. This is particularly for a positive risk, where we've identified a risk, but we notice that it could bring in an opportunities into the business. Then we want to exploit it. We want to enhance it, which is one of the things that projects hardly do. And this is where the opportunity logs come in. So once a risk has been identified, we would know if it's a threat to the delivery, the objective of the project, or if it's an opportunity. Once we identify that is an opportunity, then we want to exploit it. We want to enhance it. That way, it will bring in more, it could be bringing more revenue, or it could increase our coverage within the country. So that's one example, one way of treating or responding to a positive risk. I've also put here a contingency plan. This is hardly done really in a lot of environments. We have mitigation plan, and the essence of mitigation plan is to reduce the likelihood or the impact of that risk. But what happens when the risk materialize and turn to an issue? Most of the time, contingency plan is a way of dealing with a risk that has turned into an issue. So should this risk materialize, these are the steps that we are taking to make sure that we deal with the issue quickly. And this is one of the things as a project manager that you don't want to have, having to deal with issues on your project. It's still okay to be able to deal with a risk because it's a probability, there's a possibility of it happening. But you don't want to be having your risk turning into an issue. That way, you will hardly have time to deliver the project that you are meant to deliver because you'll be busy chasing on how to resolve the issues. Once a risk materializes and become an issue, it takes a lot of time and energy and resources to be able to resolve it and turn it back into a risk or close it out. So one of the best things that you can do as a project manager or as a project person is to have contingency plan on your top risk. Should they materialize, you have a backup of how to be able to deal with them. So those are the different ways. And this is dependent on the environment, on the industry where you find yourself. And it might not be all that will be applicable depending on the environment. But that is a way of how we treat or respond to risk in the project environment. So the processes, what's the process of managing risk? We've talked about identifying it, we've talked about assessing it, we've talked about treating it, which is providing the mitigation action. this is not a standard approach that everybody, because it depends on the organization and the methodology that they are adopting. But most of the time in a waterfall environment, this is the process of how you manage your risk. Once you identify it and you assess it, you provide your mitigation actions and you have your risk log. I will share with us a sample of a risk log. That is kind of a complicated one, but you could create something very simple. You populate the risk log and you regularly review the risk of mitigation actions and communicate it to the risk owners. So one thing I just remember now is in a project environment or when you're managing a risk, or even it could come up in an interview, a risk owner doesn't necessarily need to be the person that identified the risk. And that is why everybody on the project is involved when you're having the workshop. You could be the one to identify the risk, but you might not be the owner. And the owner of the risk could be the action owner. I've been in an environment where we have just one person identify the risk. It was being owned by the project manager, but you have multiple actions owners because the risk that was identified spanned across different areas of the project team, of the project, the work stream. So everyone within the work streams have got an action to do to make sure that this risk does not materialize and it does not turn into an issue. So we all have a part to play in making sure that this risk does not materialize into an issue. So you could have multiple mitigations actions owner, and some of them might not be in the review sessions, and that's why you communicate the actions to them. And occasionally you might need to provide reports on risk that you're escalating to senior management. Along this process, you also need to find out what are the triggers for this risk. What triggered this risk? Is it due to resourcing? Is it due to budget? Is it due to third parties? What triggered this risk? What caused this risk? So that we can document it in a lesson learned. Should such type of projects, or should we be delivering this type of project in the future? These are the triggers that we need to look out for so that we can quickly monitor and track our risk on the project and document it in the lesson learned. Once that is documented, you just regularly review the risk until the end of the project, or you close out the risk once the mitigations actions have been fully applied into it. And I also put it here, risk is not one process that we do just once all in a project environment. This is something that is continuous throughout the life cycle of the project. Towards the end of the project, any risk that has not materialized by the time the project has been delivered and is not related to the project delivery or objectives, you hand them over to the business as usual, and those type of risks will become operational that needs to be monitored and tracked as the outcome or the output of the project is being used by the business. So it could be a risk that has been raised during the project, but is related to the functionality or the use of the products that we are delivering as a project team. So you hand over that project and it becomes an operational risk that needs to be tracked by the operations or the business as usual team. When it comes to governance on the project, on the project or for the risk management, there are sometimes or most of the time decisions that need to be made during the risk review in terms of the actions, the mitigations actions, in terms of the escalation, in terms of the plan. So for the governance of that particular risk management, you need to ensure that the right people are in attendance to make such decisions. And as a project manager or as a program manager, depending on the type of risk and the level of severity, you need to establish a risk review frequency. How often do we need to review our risk within this project team, within this project? Sometimes it depends on the phase where those risks are identified as well. If the risk is identified at the beginning of the project and it has very little impact, you might be having a monthly or bi-weekly review session. But if it's identified during the execution process and it's going to have a major impact, you might be having the risk review every 2 days or every 3 days to be able to track the progress of how that risk is, or if the mitigations actions or whatever treatment that we've decided to do is actually working. So establish that frequency, and that should be flexible to accommodate the type of risk or the severity of the risk. When it comes to reporting the risk to whoever, then we need to understand what is the outcome of this risk that we are reporting. What information are we passing across to the senior management? All of this will form the governance around your risk management. What are the minimum standard requirements for a risk? How do we define it? How do we identify it? And what are the approach that we want to use for escalating our risk to the senior management? Is it just the red risk, or is it a risk that we think they're going to turn into an issue that we are planning to escalate? All of this needs to be documented in your risk management governance. We are almost at the end. So these are the key things when you are raising a risk or when you are setting up a risk log or a risk register. I've divided them into different areas. You have the risk identification, you have the risk impact, and you have your progress update. So regardless of the methodology of the project that you're in, there are key information that still needs to be within your risk register. You need to have the risk ID in case you need to reference it in any document or in any communication to your senior stakeholders. You need to have who identified it and the date the risk was identified. When we talk about the date it was identified, they just wanted to understand how long has this risk been on the project? The mitigations that we have been applying to it, are they actually being effective? Or do we need to change our approach to how we're dealing or mitigating this risk? What is the cost category? This helps to give the lesson session, say, okay, this type of project, we have this type of risk. It could be a fixed time project or an upgrade project. What are the popular risks that are associated with them? How have we been able to deal with them? How have we been able to treat this type of risk? And that's where your cost category is, so that if something similar has happened, you can learn from the previous project on what they have done to be able to deal with it. You're not running around as a project team to start looking for actions or things that you need to do to be able to reduce the likelihood or the impact of such risk happening. What is a description of the risk? What is this risk in itself? The description needs to be very clear in a layman without any technicality involved in it, in saying, oh, it has to be very simple for any risk description. It doesn't necessarily need to involve technical informations in it. And then we now start talking about the impact and the consequences. Based on the impact and the consequences, it will help you to be able to know how you want to treat or respond to the risk and what could be the cost implication of it. Remember at the beginning, I mentioned something around the risk impact, majorly around the timeline of when the project needs to be delivered and around the budget. And budget could mean a lot of things. It could be the resources. If the risk materialize or is not identified on time, we could be wasting a lot of money on the investment on the project. So having this key element and the mitigation actions, as well as what progress has been made thus far on the risk. Then this is not necessary in some environments. If the risk is has materialized and has become an issue, you need to it needs to be recorded in your risk log to say, okay, this risk has materialized and it's become an issue. And you need to transfer it to an issue log or an issue register to be able to track it regularly and monitor it in a way that it can return back into a risk. So this is the different headings that I have created for a risk templates or risk and issue templates that you can use or emulate when you're tracking your risk in the project environment, or questions you can ask even if you are not the project manager. You can ask the project team to say, has this been considered? Do we have the cost implication? What is the score? Or even if you understand the likelihood and the impact, is this a low risk or a red risk that we need senior management involvement or support? Okay, so I said it depends on the environment, right? Assumptions log or an action log, that is like a live document that needs to constantly be reviewed and be looked into, and all of them still form part of your risk management process. So I've just typed what some people call it, a RADO or a risk or a RAID, and the full acronyms, what the acronym means. Opportunity log comes most of the time from a positive risk that has been identified that needs to be enhanced or exploit. And for assumption log, you need very basic information into what the assumption is. And most of the time, as a project manager or as a program manager, you want to make sure that your assumptions are recorded in your PID, project initiation document, so that it's known that you have captured it at the beginning or along the line of the project during the life cycle, whatever phase it is, all of these assumptions. And the title of the assumptions, what's the description, who is owning it. You can have them all in one spreadsheet if you are using a spreadsheet, because there are different tools that are being used, very easy tools these days. You have the decision log as well that provides information on the decision title, the details, who are the decision makers. This is also very, very important, the decision log. You could have a decision log or you could have a dependency log. Why I'm stressing that decision log is very important is that there will be a lot of decisions that will be made on the project that would not be documented, that will come back and bite you as a project or program manager if it's not been documented and you don't have a record of it. Oh, this decision was made in what forum, by who? So having this, an example I would give is maybe there's a functionality that has been agreed that will not be delivered as part of the project when they started doing the scope requirements. You need to document that, because towards when it's coming to testing phase of the project, the senior stakeholders might say, oh, we agreed to do this functionality at the beginning. But because you don't have a decision log that is tracking all the decisions that has been made on the project, you don't have any evidence that states that this was the decision that was made and when it was made and who made it. That way you feel very, I don't want to use the word, in how you are able to track your decisions on the project, which is one of the core controls that needs to be in place with your risk management or risk and issue management. So there are different tools. I'm not going to focus on them today. I'll just use the popular one, which is a spreadsheet that people use in tracking risk. We have Jira is becoming very popular in how people are using Jira to track their risk or RAID. And this one is very good in the sense that it helps to be able to assign different people. So the risk can change ownership as well, depending on how the response is being tracked on the project. So people use Jira, they use SharePoint. SharePoint is very basic, similar to Excel spreadsheets. It's just that it's on the SharePoint site. They use Project Online, very, very basic and similar to Excel spreadsheets as well. And Project Online, as well as Monday.com. And there are a lot of in-house tools as well. One thing that I forgot to say is when you're tracking your risk, you need to have what is called due date. Sometimes it's called a due date or it's called a proximity date. That is the date that we're tracking to say, okay, we have a timeline. By this particular date, if this risk is not lessened, the impact is not lessened or the likelihood of it not lessened, it will become an issue. And that is also one of the key information that you need to have on your risk log. Or you can ask in a project environment, do we have the proximity date for this risk? Maybe you've got an action to do to be able to lessen or to reduce the impacts of the risk. You need to understand what's the proximity date or the due date of that risk. And lastly is Confluence. I've not used Confluence before, but I've seen few people using Confluence to track their risk. And some of us are available on YouTube, I would guess, or assume. This is the semi-last page of this session, risk reporting. So risk reporting, it's not like a regular thing, but it's one of the process in how we are managing risk within the project and program environment. And the reporting could mean the list of overdue risk. As a project manager, you have the responsibility to make sure that your risk that has been raised within your project are being reviewed regularly and has got an action owner. But some cases happens where some risks have expired. They haven't materialized, but they have expired because there's not been any traction or any attention given to such risk. And you might have an audit on your project where they will request you to come and produce a list of, or sometimes they might not even ask that, depending on the system. They could generate it and that will put your project in a bad light, saying, oh, you have this type of risk. Do you know the implication of risk that has expired? And occasionally, just for progress of how your risk management process is working, they might want to review how many risks have we identified on this project and what are they related to, and how many of them have we fully mitigated, just to be able to understand that we are following the right process and we're managing risk on the project. The red status, those are the ones that based on the likelihood and impact matrix that you want to escalate, or you want to closely monitor if you are not even escalating them with the business or with the senior stakeholders. So the escalated risk is almost similar to your red status risk as well. The ones that you would put out there and say, okay, you need support from the senior stakeholders to be able to help you to review them. And you could have some risks that are missing mitigation plans or actions. So there could be a lot of reporting that you may be asked to do or that may come up that you have to present in terms of risk within your project or within your program. So I've put here, if you work in an environment that you have a structured project management approach, you might not need to do some of this as a PM. It might be the PMO office that will do it, or it might be the project support person that will do it. But as a project manager, your responsibility is you are accountable for the delivery of your project, successful delivery of your project. And that successful delivery hangs around how you are able to manage all the core aspects of your project, which is your risk one of them is your risk management. So who is owning what in terms of the actions, in terms of the owner, who is taking responsibility for this risk. You don't necessarily need to own it, but you need to be accountable to make sure that the people that own it are tracking it and following the actions that they have said they are going to do to reduce the impact of the risk so that it doesn't materialize, or should it materialize, it lessen the impact on the project. You develop templates and tools, you capture actions, you escalate the risk to senior management. Those are some of your responsibility when it comes to managing risk within your project. And I will go to the PMO. Yeah, so the roles of a PMO analyst or a project support are very similar to the PMO lead. It's just that the forum might be different and the environment might be different, but they do almost similar roles with risk management at different forums for different stakeholders. Stakeholders it covers everybody on the project, both the business users, the project team, and the senior stakeholders, which will be your sponsors. So as a PMO analyst or PMO lead, you set the review sessions, you chase for updates, you facilitate the sessions, you regularly maintain the risk log, which I will show us shortly. And as a PMO lead, you coordinate at a program or directorate level this risk, and also you escalate the risk to when necessary escalates now, it will be at the program level or at the directorate level. So it's not all the risk that will need to go to the senior stakeholders, even at the project level. Some of them might just need to be escalated to the program manager. And from that level onward, as a PMO lead person, you would either escalate to the enterprise level risk manager or to the portfolio lead manager. So those are some of the responsibilities and roles for it. I will take a few questions and probably maybe we'll have 5 minutes break for stretching and we'll come back. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen now. Do we have questions? I'm not sure I'm seeing questions now.
Sorry. So lies within the PMO office. Would you say that pretty much everyone within a reporting role has a role to log risk, including, the entire read, suite? Thank you.
Yeah, so it's not only the PMO office, and PMO is the program management office that deals with template tools, processes of how a project needs to be delivered. They give directions on, depending on the maturity of the PMO, let me put it that way, because there are different levels of PMO. But I wouldn't say it's only the PMO that needs to log the risk. At the beginning, when we were talking about the risk workshop during the identification phase, every member of the project team, so long you're working on that project, you should be logging risk or managing the risk. And sometimes you might not be the one that identified the risk, but you could be the owner of it. And at the same time, you might not even be the one that logged the risk. You might not be the owner of the risk, but you might have actions that you need to take to be able to make sure that the impact or the likelihood of the risk is lessened. So everybody that works on the project is responsible for that. But what I meant by the project manager is the responsibility or the accountability of the successful delivery of the project lies with him. And he should be the one, not necessarily like having all the different actions, but making sure that the people that have been assigned as the risk owner or people that have been assigned as the mitigation actions owner are doing what they needed to do. That's the what I was referring to in terms of that accountability. But everyone that works within the project team should be logging a risk. And during the workshop phase, remember the different risk cost categories that was listed earlier. It could be related to the business team, a reporting team, depending on the type of project you are delivering, or it could be related to funding or budget. It could be, maybe you needed 4 BAs to work on the project and they only have funding for 2 BAs. You need to be raising the risk as a BA lead or as a BA person, because the workload is going to come on you unless they change the scope. So anyone that works on the project is responsible, has that responsibility to log risk and monitor their risk. But the overall accountability of the successful delivery of the project lies with the project manager, and he needs to ensure that people are doing what they needed to do or what they are agreed to do. Does that answer the question? Lady B? I think she's on mute now. You can type in the message if you're unable to unmute yourself. Okay, I would assume that has answered the question. So I'll go to the next person. Today, do you have, I can see you raise your hand. Please, can you unmute yourself, today?
Hi there. I'm so sorry, I was stuck on mute there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Great session, and I want to commend your slide as well. Very, very lovely. Thank you. So my question essentially was talking about the risk management. Are there frameworks that we must align to or adhere to when doing risk management? I'm interested to know, for example, for a company that maybe does not have a risk management process, what are the things that you need to put in place for them? So if you're given that burden or that task to say, okay, we take you on as a risk management officer, what are the things that you need to do essentially to get them up to speed? The other question I asked was in relation to asset register. For an organization that does not have an asset register,
Okay.
would you be able to actually carry out a risk management I'll stop there for now. Maybe just let you go through.
So the first one is a framework.
Yes.
I'm hearing myself back. Can you mute, please? Yes. I think it's okay now. So the first one is around the framework. Largely, two things I would say. One is the environment where you want to establish the risk process. You need to understand how mature they are in terms of their project delivery. How structured is that environment? Maybe I should have done something around the PMO office and maturity, because in some environment, they might not have that structure in place. So that kind of environment, what you would need to do is to understand the key things that is, what's the word now? The key important things to them when it comes to their project delivery and how you can be able to embed in risk process. And I would advise a very simple template. In terms of the templates, right, and the framework, it's dependent on the maturity of the environment and the methodology that they have decided to adopt. So, and the type of project as well that they are, the type of project that you are delivering or that business is delivering. That would form the framework or the template that you would use. So for agile environment, they would, or Scrum environment, they would probably use Jira templates to track, because they would have different other things that they are tracking with using the Jira tool. But in a waterfall environment, they also still use Jira. But the template is to make sure that the key information is relating to the risk, having ownership, having a treatment or a response, and having the severity, what's the impact of that risk on the project or on the overall program. That could form your template for an environment where they don't have any structure. But where there's a structure, there is something called governance framework or investment framework in any project environment. And this would document how they want projects to be delivered. And in the process of saying, this is how we want this type of project to be delivered, it could be the value of the project or the complexity of the project. Within the governance, they will have risk management process there. This is in a structured environment, right? Within that governance framework, they call it, well, in the environment I've worked, is usually called governance framework, investment framework, or of how they wanted to deliver their projects. And they list out different things based on the methodologies, the value, the complexity of the project. That way, you will be able to develop the templates. But one thing that would echo out is regarding introducing a risk management process, you need to highlight the benefits to them. For anything that we wanted to introduce, continuous improvement, a new way of working, most of the time we highlight the value of what that will have on the project. Assuming projects are being delayed for a year or 2 years, without, you want to find out why. It could be that they don't have a strong within their planning process, or there is nothing that documents their assumptions, that documents their risk. That way they start going back and forth to review their assumptions or to review the scope or requirement that has been agreed. So, but if you have a proper RAID management process in place, that will help them to be able to address such issues on time. I don't know if that answers your question in terms of the framework. So there's not a set stone, most of the time, if it's a structured environment, you might need to create something very simple in terms of template. But if it's unstructured environment, but if it's a structured environment, you definitely have something called governance framework that outlines different process or approach of how they want to deliver the project. And if there is none, industry best practice, one of the ones I've just delivered this afternoon. I hope that answered the question in terms of your framework. And on the second one, in terms of assets, I think I'm not 100% sure I understand it. Do you mean they need to have risk log for asset management? Can you repeat that question again, please? I can today. Are you able to unmute?
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, I was just saying that for a company that does not have a full-blown asset register, would that be possible to conduct a risk management?
Yes, it will be possible, because regardless of the environment, it's still important. It could be a very simple risk management process that is not as rigorous. You know, when project sponsors are investing money onto the project, or every project, let me put it this way, there's always a benefit. There's always an outcome. Why do we go into this project? There must be something that we wanted to do that will see the value that it will have. So if it's not a full-blown assets management area, you can still embed in a very simple, not complicated risk register or risk management process. And I liked the benefits of them having that on their project. I have a template here. This was one of the templates that we used when we did the ladder back down project in 2021, I think. And this one, I would say, is from here that I created the high level subheadings of what should be in your risk register or risk log. And to some extent, this is a bit high level and complicated in terms of the informations that are required there. Some of them might not be necessary if it's not a full-blown matured environment. You just need to put in something very simple. But the key informations are the risk has got an owner, is clearly written, and it's got an actions. And the essence of us doing this is to make sure that we have controls in place so that we know we plan to deliver projects at a certain time, but things could go wrong. And what are the things that could go wrong? That's the essence of us having a risk or risk management on the project. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that answers the question. Thank you so much. So the frameworks you mentioned, do you have some that we can sort of adhere to, that we look out for? And I think the final question I asked is in terms of external auditors. If external auditors are coming to do a risk assessment, what do we need to have in place before they arrive, and things like that? I'm looking at program level, enterprise level sort of risk.
So for external auditors, your number one is your rate register and the frequency of updates that you have. You know, when I was referring to the reporting earlier on, you could have multiple rates that has been documented, which is one of the reasons why risk was not fully being implemented. You have risk being documented and it's not being tracked or it's not being monitored. So you want to make sure that you have governance in place, and governance will guide with your frequency, the key people that needs to be there, the outcome you wanted to achieve, or like a terms of reference. for your risk register. Once you have all those things in place, like your governance, your process, your templates, and the templates in terms of the risk log or risk register, once you have that in place and is reviewed regularly. When I mean regularly, remember you're talking at the enterprise level. It doesn't have to be every week. It could be every month, but there is an update done. It's not like a sit-alone template that is just sitting there and it needs to be brushed up during the sessions when we are expecting auditors. And it has an escalation route as well. There was one I did at the directorate level for one of the telecommunication on, to just support with auditing as well. You just need to have the process tailored out. Who are we reporting to? When are we escalating to? I could share a sample of it or create something because it's got the company logo. So I wouldn't want to be sharing internal documents outside. So I could create something similar and share on the Ladderback page for people to see. And once you have that kind of process and is being followed at that enterprise level or directorate level, that would help you to be ready anytime you have an auditor or audit visit. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. I'm conscious other people have questions, so I'll let it go because I was going to talk about risk in the cloud, especially because that is my sort of domain. And you spoke about a RAT report or something about in your presentation. So, but thank you for answering the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Atibukum, I think I'm seeing your hand raised.
Yeah, please. I'm Ibukun, that's my name, but please could Mr. Luguleko go first, please? Thank you, because he's a guest. I'm not a guest, so please could Mr. Luguleko unmute yourself, please, and ask your question. Thank you. And then I'll ask afterwards.
Hello, we're waiting for you.
Yeah, exactly. You're unmuted, but you're not talking. Could you kindly ask your question, please? Or is that a legacy hand that you raised? Have you actually got a question? Okay, whilst we wait for Mr. Luguleko to ask his question, I'll just ask my question here in terms of, it's actually a comment. I mean, a comment with regards to what Akintunde has just said there, that when auditors come in, that they want to see that you've got the processes that Mary just mentioned, as well as policies in place. They want to see that you've got your operational risk, enterprise risk management policies in place. They also want to see that those, whatever you've documented in the policies, that they've actually been embedded in processes across the organization. They like to see a lot of things that Mary has also mentioned about ownership as well of the risks, making sure that those risks that they have been correctly identified, they have each been assigned an owner as well. These are sort of things that auditors like to ask. And I just wanted to mention something with regards to the, and sorry, Mary, for mentioning this, but I think it's quite pertinent that I mention it because Akintunde asked that question. I know that you're in information security. And one of the things that we need to be aware of is that whilst it's everyone's responsibility to identify risks, not everyone should have access to that risk log, clearly. So Mary's talked, really well in terms of the project risk, the RAID and everything, but it's not everybody that should have access to those logs, your issues log, your dependency logs. Why? Because of course, you're noting risks to the enterprise that could be exploited by an insider as well. So if each person is actually identifying a risk, that doesn't mean that they should have access to other risks that have been identified across the enterprise. So that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very brilliant contribution. Thank you. I can see comments that has been written here by Mr. Ologunleko, but I don't understand the question. It says, my question pertains to risk treatment or response and risk governance and direction.
Yeah, thank you, Mary.
Yeah, but it's not clear. So could you tell us what you mean by that, please?
All right. Thanks very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can
All
hear
right.
you.
My name is Shegun Ologunleko. I'd like to thank you for your presentation. Very excellent and very in-depth. Yes, aspects I wanted to mention about the risk treatment and response, focusing on waterfall methodology. Oftentimes when we work on construction projects, one of the risk treatments we use, which you mentioned, is a contingency. Now, high level as a management reserve, and which manages unknown unknowns, and then low level as in the contingency itself, which tends to the known unknowns that we know will happen, you know. And I wanted to mention that speaking to this also will help us to learn about that. And another one also I wanted to mention also is talking about governance. Organizations have risk management environment.
Your line is faint. Sorry, your line is faint back and forth.
Organizations have risk management environment. Also work
Wow.
so that the project manager without authority.
Sorry there, your line is actually fading. Have you got headphones on that perhaps you may want to remove, please?
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes, but you're fading on and off. So if you've got
all right.
headphones,
I don't need to mention about structured organizations in the risk environment have thresholds so that program managers and project managers are not left without,
tolerance,
authority. Yes, yeah, thresholds, which is handed down to them. And the
your line has gone off. It's faded away. We can't hear anything.
Oh, sorry.
I think it might be a good idea to perhaps post your comment within the chat group. Yeah, because
well, in summary, it's a fantastic workshop training opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to Mary.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary. That is definitely a fantastic opportunity for us to learn today. Lara's asked you a question, please, in the chat window. I'm not sure if she's asked me this question directly or if she's asked it in the chat window, but she said that her follow-on question, and I think Mary could answer this definitely. My follow-on question about everyone not having access would be, what is the best way to manage the risk log in a way that allows the project team to have access to the log for status update ownership while still managing the security of the access? So I guess, Mary, you could answer that in terms of how have you gained access to the risk log on projects where you haven't had access to the enterprise risk log, for example, where you just had access to the risk, the risk areas that you're responsible for. Thank you.
Yes. So with respect to that question, it depends on the environment, right, and the structure as well. I will keep saying that. Where I work currently, they use a system, in-house system that record that they're using managing the risk, and it's been set across the different directorates. So people does have access to it, but I guess when you are joining the business, there are different, I'm trying to remember the word now, different things that you need to sign up to in terms of compliance, in terms of confidentiality. So regarding the project template or risk log, every project team members does have access, because that's just within the project. It's not really, the company is different from enterprise risk, because enterprise risk is quite the whole company, whereas this one for a project team is only for the project team have got access to it so that they could make their updates. They don't have access, and it is not even, so there's even something called business separation, where if you are in a different directorate or you're in a different, you don't have access to such. And if you are on a different program as well, you don't have access to their risk log. So it's a bit limited or restricted. It's only for people that have got access, that are within the project, that have got access to it. And obviously not everybody, as Ibukun rightly said, that would be making updates on the project is for the core leads. So you have your different work streams and you have work stream leads. Most of the time is a work stream leads that would be making such updates because they are responsible for that aspect of that work stream. For a so I have in other organizations, there are so many questions here, so just pardon me when I'm, does that answer your question, Lara? Olu, so you can, if it's a project log is one, and most of the project team will have access to it to be able to make updates to the risk log. I hope that answers your question. Please type yes or no or unmute. There are various, yes, that's true. So Lady B has come in as well, yes. That's why I said it depends on the maturity of the structure that I'm in. So if it's somewhere that is not fully structured, yes, everyone might have, but a structured environment where they take IT, cyber risk, a lot of things more serious, is on the need to have access basis. So you might be, as a project manager or as a PMO person, might be the admin that gives the access right. There's something that I recently did in one of my programs where I had to go back and review all the people that, you just realize this is a program and you have maybe 100 or 80 people, whereas on your SharePoint site or on your risk log where you have key information, you're seeing 200 or 300 people on it. So you need to review access rights regularly. Maybe people have moved on the project or they've moved to another area. So you remove those access if they are not part of the project. So I totally agree with you in terms of levels of permission is granted for various functions. Thank you, Lady B.
Thank you. Sophia's
yes.
had her hands up for a while, please.
Just one sec. Someone mentioned here, there are two. Yeah, the risk log, there are multiple risk log actually, and it depends on the level. So the project risk log is totally different from your program risk log, and that's totally different from your portfolio log, risk log. And it's also totally different from your enterprise level risk log or directorate risk log. So it's based on that environment, how it is structured there. Okay, I will go to Sophia, please, your question.
No, it was just when Ibukun asked about, ways of controlling the land. I was just going to add, I think you probably covered it anyway, but I was just going to say that, like you said, depending on the environments, I've seen maybe where people use SharePoint, for example, and like you say, depending on the entitlements or access rights, you could set the level to which people could view documents, so they could have read-only access. Again, all down to how the entitlements are configured. So that's how I've seen it.
Yeah.
Configured.
Yeah, and there are in-house. Yeah, there are in-house tools that are being used as well that time-stamped every activities that is made on the template. So if you just go in and you make changes, so we timestamp it to say, okay, this person was in there and make this change on this log or on this register.
Right, so that's sort of more like an audit solution, right? Rather than even preventing the access altogether. So
yes,
controls,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yes, yeah. On SharePoint, you can do the read-only or the write and read-only, or those kind of access, yeah, permissions. Yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So do we have any more questions? I think I finished all the ones that are on the tab here.
I don't think you've responded to Shegun Olukunleko's
Is there a comment?
question. Yeah, he's raised a question there saying, on risk governance, how do you apply organizational thresholds to assist program project managers with their decision making before risk escalation to top management?
So I would say is in support with or in line with one of the response I gave when today. So when you have your governance, it would say that this level of risk needs to be escalated. And that is based on your assessment. When you're assessing your risk in terms of the likelihood and the impact, that would help you to know, okay, the risk that we have a catastrophic impact. I want to try and see if I can go back to that. Yeah, that will have a catastrophic or major impact needs to be escalated or needs to be reported to the senior stakeholders. So the one for the directorate that I was mentioning I did then, it was written because when you're setting the process up right, there is a conversation with maybe the heads of the programs or the head of the directorate, and they would say, we see very few, remember, we also talk about the cost categories that are related to this area when we're delivering this type of project. Any risk with this type of risk score in terms of how we have impact assessed it and the likelihood of it happening, the severity that we've noticed, they needs to be escalated. And that will form the threshold for the project and program managers to know. Now, it depends on the project managers so that it doesn't escalate them. If they decided to reduce the impact of the risk, or if they decided to reduce the likelihood of the risk, then they will be held responsible for it. And most of the time, it's not just the project or program managers that would make that decision to say, oh, this is a likely risk, or this is going to have this impact. There are so many considerations that will be taken into place when they are assessing the impact. They would look at, okay, is this going to affect us in terms of timeline? How many weeks impact will it have? And this is in conjunction with the project team. It could be it's not as an SME that has raised the risk. Project manager might not be that experienced in that area. So they would want to get the opinions or the support of the SMEs to understand, okay, should this happen? How many weeks or month impact do you think it will have? or delay will have on the project. And then they will multiply it. It's a bit more complicated than the way it's expressed here, because before you finally arrive at your impact level, you want to know how much it's going to cost you. And before you get to how much it's going to cost you, you can't just give a figure. How many resources will be working on the project? How many third parties contracts that you've had a timeline, maybe it's a fixed time contract that they needed to deliver by a particular milestone. What are the dependencies on it? There's so many factors that you need to consider before you get to that impact for you to be able to understand the risk exposure. And then based on the risk exposure, that you would know which one needs to be escalated or which one needs to be maintained within the project team. And at the same time, as I mentioned, in the governance framework that states all the methodologies or approach of how they want to deliver this level or this type or complexity of project, it will state that risk from 16 or 20 above needs to be reported to this level of management. And that way, because that is already recorded in your risk log, you have to put that in. So that has already given you that threshold. Any risk below this will be managed within the project team. It will be in your process and your governance. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Shegun. Does that answer question? Okay, I would assume so. I can't hear anything. Oh, thank you. So I have a question here. If one is a PMO analyst on the project level, so that same person ensure governance on portfolio? No. As a PMO analyst, you cannot ensure governance. You can contribute to it, because as a PMO analyst, you'll be reporting into a PMO lead or you'll be reporting to a PMO manager. And the PMO manager will be working at the program or portfolio level. You can make a contribution, you say, based on your experience, based on other industry, but you cannot ensure governance at that level. You can only contribute to it and leave it to the leads to make that that decision. But you can definitely make your own contribution and be seen like that. I hope that answers your question, Emmanuel Joseph. In terms of ensuring the follow company standardization, that's not full, but I think what you're saying is if to ensure that they follow the standard ways of reporting risk or managing risk. Please, Emmanuel Joseph, do you want to elaborate this question so that I don't answer you? Oh, there's so many.
Hi, Kenny. Yeah, you just mentioned the last one right now in terms of them managing the risk log. One of the standardization that they have to ensure as a PMO analyst. So that's why I'm asking that question. If they also has the same thing at the portfolio level or at the program level, but you've just answered me right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. How do we know who set the risk appetite, especially in dealing with? So in residual risk is, how do we know, how do we manage an offshoring risk? Wow, that one. So based on, there are two questions here from Market Today. Who set the risk appetite, especially with inherent and residual risk? As a project team and the SMEs in terms of setting the residual and the inherent risk, because it could be and then when I say the project team, it also means a risk owner, because that's their area of expertise. someone that is a solution architect now, I'm just a PM. I raise a risk around the solution that has been designed. I wouldn't know the complexity that is involved, right? So, but a solution architect person or a lead person would be able to know. And also within the PMO office, program management office, that involves all the delivery management, the PMOs. They have some people that are called like a quality assurance people. They are vast, they have got a lot of experience. So sometimes they can also be called in to be able to decide on the who set in setting that inherent or residual risk. The residual risk is not an individual effort. So yes, I've applied this mitigations, but I feel the risk is reduced. It needs to be a joint effort by the project team, as well as if they've got a quality assessor within the program, the PMO office that can support them with that. But everything that is being done is governed by the framework that has been set. In terms of, yes, please. In terms of how do we manage offshoring risk? To be honest, I've not had to deal with offshoring risk. Even with an offshore resources, it just has to be dealt by the head of operations. But I would give Ibukun the opportunity to contribute in answering that question. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to ask you to kindly unmute me, and then I realized that I could unmute myself. Thank you. Thanks again for all the answers to these questions. And I think with regards to the risk appetite, the first thing we need to recognize is that the board and the senior management team, they actually set a corporate risk appetite. And then that then flows down into the enterprise risk register, and that will also flow down into your program and project risk register. So if the board says, for example, that they have medium tolerance, for example, medium appetite for a cyber attack, or zero appetite, that will flow down into your project. So the risk appetite always flows down from the board, senior management, to the enterprise, then to the portfolio level, and then downwards from there. With regards to offshoring risk, as you know, Mr. Akintunde, that's dealt with as part of your third-party risk management framework. And one of the things that regulators expect to see is that you do enhanced due diligence when you're dealing with third parties that are based offshore. So whilst you can get away with doing due diligence, where you send out the normal questionnaires and things like that, the minute that to organizations or third parties that are onshore, once you start dealing with third parties that are out of the country, so what we're, so for everyone who doesn't know what an offshoring risk is, that is dealing with a third party that is not within the country as the company that is actually outsourcing the operations. So how do we manage that? We conduct enhanced due diligence, and we'll be looking at things like the data protection regulations. Where do they actually store their data? Do they store it within organizations do they actually do trade with organizations that may be on the sanctions list? So there's a sanctions list for countries like, for example, Russia, which may be on a sanctions list internationally currently. So when you're doing your enhanced due diligence before you offshore a service to another country, you'd be making sure that you're not offshoring, you're not sending, a service or a process offshore to a country like Russia, or Iran may also be on a sanctions list currently. I'm not up to date with which countries are on that list. So it's just enhanced due diligence. That's how we manage offshoring risk, basically. And I hope I answered your question there.
I think I've just linked that too. Very well.
Yep, thank you very much. I think with that answer, I'm totally satisfied. Thank you so much. I've learned something.
Thank you. And I've learned a lot as well, basically, because I'm not a, a project or program or portfolio professional like our Mary Kenny is. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I think I've learned a lot as well. So as I've said, we're all here to learn. I have a question here, Jimmy. What process flow methodology should be applied for market risk management within financial services? Any point out technology to leverage to identify, assess, and mitigate? I will open that question to any more experienced person to answer. I'm not sure I understand it in terms of the process flow methodology.
Maybe the question should be asked again.
It's written out. He is written here. What process?
Yeah. And what I meant is that if the individual could verbally ask the question, we may be able to understand exactly what they're asking.
While we're waiting for them to come on. Oh yeah, Jimmy, do you want to ask your question? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and very insightful session. Right. So from a financial services perspective, I mean, it's a highly regulated industry, as you know, and there are a couple of things that have already been covered. Like Ibukun mentioned there about enhanced due diligence, right? So from a market perspective, with regards to, for example, anything that could happen in the market to, impact on the stocks, impact stock markets, for example. So, for example, COVID, of course, as we know, or Brexit, would have affected, the stock prices and stuff, right? So from that perspective, I'm just wondering, from a risk perspective, what methodologies should be in place aside what have been mentioned? So if there's anybody that, perhaps have worked in that space, if there's any pointers as to what should be applied, right, to manage risk in that space.
That's a very good question, which really wouldn't be covered here. But from a trading perspective, I know that they do things like apply things like forwards and futures. Those are used to manage things like interest rate risks or exchange rate risks. So they actually buy currency, or they stake an interest in buying currency in advance, just in case the exchange rate or the interest rate changes. So the forwards, futures, those are some of the things that they use to manage market risk, amongst other things. But when you talk about things like COVID and Brexit, those would be managed not as part of your risk management program, but as part of your business continuity planning, which is different to risk management. There is a large element of risk management when you're talking about business continuity planning, but those are two separate programs. A business continuity professional would be required to understand risk management, but a risk management professional won't necessarily be required to understand business continuity. But for COVID, for what's the other one that you mentioned? Brexit, organizations. Yeah, sorry, did you say a third one?
Yeah, and perhaps climate hazards as well. So
yes. So so organizations will have already started to put together a sustainability program for climate. Business continuity, though, is what organizations used to manage. For example, in 2010 or 11, I was in a senior management team somewhere in an organization in the UK. And at the time, we had to plan for, so whilst I was responsible for IT and information security at the time, I was still part of the senior management team that planned for a pandemic. At the time, we were planning for things like swine flu, bird flu. Nobody thought of COVID. Nobody, imagines that anything like COVID would come. But because we'd just had swine flu or bird flu, one of the two, we were responsible for putting together a business continuity plan. And the first step in doing that is to conduct a business impact assessment, which is similar to a risk assessment, which Mary's just taught us now. It's similar to, because what you're doing is that you're examining all your business processes, as in, okay, we process HR payments, we process this, we deliver this service. You're taking a look at all of your services and your processes, and then you're conducting an assessment of the potential impact to the business in the event those processes or services weren't to be available. So business continuity management is totally different. Well, it's not totally different, but it's separate to risk management and including market risk management. Although a financial services institution, when doing their business impact assessments for their business continuity plans, they will actually be assessing market risk. As in, what would happen if the conditions in the market were so adverse that we weren't able to continue our operations. So there is a link there. However, there are two separate sets of professionals that would do the business continuity planning, risk management. And I hope that answered your question a bit.
Splendidly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. Mary Kenny, please, can I hand over to you again?
Yes, I'm here. Oh, I think we've already answered that one from Jimmy. The next question is, how well does risk management lie in the responsibility of the business analyst? As long as you're part of the project team, yes, you still have your responsibility in making sure that risk within your area or where you've been assigned an action to do, you are doing it. So in terms, when you say risk management, do you mean taking ownership of it or doing what you needed to do to make sure that the risk that has been identified does not materialize or become an issue? If it's the latter, then yes, a BA is involved in every risk session, review sessions or management session that the project team have. But the whole accountability is still lies with the project manager to make sure that people are doing what they needed to do. But as a part of the project team, as a BA, yes, you have the responsibility to make sure that the risk that you have identified or someone has identified and you are the risk owner that, or mitigation action owner, that you're doing what you needed to do. That way, that's your contribution of risk management process. Yeah, your own contribution. I hope that answers your question. DESDS. And then someone is saying, what's the role of the PMO in creation management of risk log? You own it. Because as a PMO, if I understand what you're saying, PMO analyst or PMO lead, your responsibility is to create templates, process, document processes. Yes, so you own it. You need to own that process, own that creation of the template, and ensure compliance with the template by supporting your PM in that role. And this is also dependent on how the organization is structured as well, because there are organizations where the PMOs work in support with the PM, and whereas there are also some organizations where the PMOs set the rules, set the template, the process, which project manager will be delivering what project. So it depends on where you find yourself. But yes, you are fully involved in the creation and management of risk log or risk register as a PMO person. I hope that answers your question, Lola.
Hello. Yes. The issue I have is I just started as a PM recently, and one of my tasks is to create a risk log, but it seems like.
Thank you.
Yeah, so to answer that question, maturity of your PMO matters. And if it's not matured, yes, as a PM, you have the responsibility to do it, to set it up. Because, you know, at the beginning of the session, one of the things that I mentioned why risk management is not properly embedded in project delivery is because there's no clear roles and responsibility. So it would be good to identify what's the clear responsibility of the PMO and the project manager on your project.
Okay, yeah.
Does that answer your question, Lola?
Yes, yes, it does. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I think this is a contribution from Mr. Shego. One sec, sorry. It's a contribution saying, thanks, Ibuku. In terms of budget, yes, the risk appetite could be that the organization cannot accept any risk above. Yes. Yes, so that is an agreement. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, we don't have any more questions. Do we have anybody else that have got any question? And if there is none, we will end it here. Are you still raising your hand today?
Yeah, thank you. Just sorry, kindly ignore that. I think I got lost in the cloud world. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Esther is raising her hand. Hi, Esther.
Hi, Mackenzie. Thank you for the session. I just want to speak to the last question of the last lady that asked the question. So I worked in a similar place, and the PMO was on the project I was working on was kind of like admin, but I was the one that told her that she will manage the risk, which she has the knowledge of. So you just have to probably sometimes give the person, the PMO attached to your project, some delegate rather. You have to delegate, use your discretion to delegate, know what the PMO should do and delegate in that regard. That might probably help. So you don't go back and ask and you'll feel like it's an afterthought and need you to come back to ask what the PMO should be doing since the project has started.
Yeah, that is very, very true. Thank you, Esther, for your contribution. But I think at the same time, it's also good because there might not be clear boundaries of what is expected from the PMO and the PM in that regard. So collaboration is key here because we're all working to deliver the same objectives. Collaboration, great communications, building good relationship together for the purpose of delivering the project is also important. So if you understand that the PM or the PMO doesn't know what to do, then you can come in. But if they know what to do and it's not in their remit, but ordinarily in a structured environment, the PMO would be setting those things in place. But if it's unstructured and the PMO doesn't know what to do, or they do know what to do and they're not doing it, then you need to, be taking it up to make sure that that is done or get get support from stakeholders. But I would assume that it's something very easy that can be resolved within the project team between the PMO and the PM to have it. There should be a template, really. So thank you, everyone, for your time. I actually wanted to leave my, I'll stop sharing my screen now. Thank you.
We'd like to say thank you for your time, rather. It's you that have chosen to come here and share of your wealth of experience and knowledge with us. And we really appreciate you. And I'm sure that if we ask you to come back again, hopefully you'll agree to come back and share more with us. Mary did actually leave her LinkedIn address within the last slide. And I wonder if you could kindly put that up again, if you're still here with us, Mary. Kindly share
Yes,
that
I'm
last
here.
slide. Thank you.
I'm trying to.
Thank you so much, so that everyone can, you know, simply connect with you on LinkedIn and ask you any further questions. Thank you. Thank you. Is your slides coming up?
Oh, slide. Oh, I've just posted the link of my, I think
okay,
that's my
you've posted
LinkedIn.
it. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you
I
so
can
much.
still
You
share my
posted it in the
screen.
chat window. That's fine. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. So any questions, please continue to ask them within the Ladder Back Down WhatsApp group. So if you've seen the link to that, then kindly join the group and also join group 5, which is where program and risk executives are meant to, risk managers rather, are meant to actually collaborate. We also have a group 2 where our GRC, governance, risk and compliance professionals are meant to talk, but they don't really talk that much there. Thank you. So Mary, would
Thank
you
you,
like to have
everyone.
the final say in closing the meeting?
I want